The morning light crept softly through the lace curtains, landing on the faded photographs that lined the mantel. Eleanor Gray stood silently in the middle of her living room, the weight of the quiet pressing down on her shoulders. The ticking of the old clock on the wall was the only sound in the house, a cruel reminder that time still moved, even when life had stopped meaning much. The house had once been full of laughter, the echo of tiny footsteps running through the hallway, the sound of her children's voices arguing and teasing, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. It all lived in her memory like a dream she could no longer touch. Now, dust gathered on the frames, and cobwebs clung to corners no one cared to clean. Eleanor, 60 years old and weary, moved slowly, her joints stiff but her heart even stiffer. Her husband, Harold, had passed away 3 years ago. He had been her anchor, her companion in every struggle. Together they had built this home from nothing. Every brick, every corner of the garden held a story of their sacrifices. But after he was gone, everything changed. Her children, Clara and Michael, visited a few times in the beginning, but soon their visits became shorter, their excuses longer, and eventually their presence vanished altogether. Still, Eleanor kept their rooms exactly as they had left them. It gave her comfort to believe that maybe one day they would return. On this quiet morning, she decided to clean Michael's old room. She carried a basket of cleaning cloths and stepped inside. The air was stale. His trophies still stood proudly on the shelf. His posters still clung to the walls, though the edges had curled with time. She opened the window to let in fresh air, and a gust of wind blew a few old papers off the desk. As she bent down to pick them up, something caught her eye, an old photo album lying half open beneath the bed. She sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through it, her wrinkled fingers trembling slightly. The first page showed a young Eleanor and Harold holding their newborn son. Her eyes welled up, remembering that day. The joy, the exhaustion, the promise that her children would never lack love or comfort. But as she turned another page, her heart froze. It was a family photograph taken years later during Clara's graduation. They all stood smiling, Harold beside her, Clara in her gown, and Michael with his arm around his sister. But something was wrong. Her own face had been scratched out. Harsh lines cut through her image, almost violently. Eleanor stared at it for a long moment, her vision blurring. Her chest tightened, a deep ache spreading through her body. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The pain that had always been silent inside her now had a voice. She placed her trembling hand over the damaged photo and whispered, "Why?" There was no answer, only the rustle of curtains in the wind. She felt dizzy, her mind racing back through years of moments that suddenly looked different now. The phone calls that stopped coming. The birthdays they forgot. The holidays she spent alone, pretending she was fine. The times she had sent money when they said they were struggling, only to see pictures of their vacations online. It all made sense now. They hadn't drifted away. They had erased her, bit by bit, just like this picture. Eleanor put the album aside and sat still for a long time. The old grandfather clock chimed 11, but she didn't move. She realized that she had spent her entire life giving love, time, energy, forgiveness, and in return she had become invisible. The house that once symbolized family now felt like a museum of betrayal. When the afternoon sun began to fade, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The garden outside had gone wild, the flowers growing in strange directions. She used to take such pride in pruning them, in keeping everything perfect, but perfection didn't matter anymore. What was the point of beauty when no one came to see it? Her eyes wandered to the telephone sitting on the table. She thought about calling Clara, just to hear her voice. She picked up the receiver, hesitated, then put it down again. No, she whispered to herself. If they wanted to talk, they would have. Her voice broke, the first tear slipping down her cheek. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was something heavier, darker, something that had been building for years, waiting for the right moment to wake up. As night settled over the house, Eleanor lit a single candle and watched the flame dance. "Maybe this is who I am now," she said softly. "A ghost in my own home." But deep down, beneath the grief, something else stirred, a flicker of anger, sharp and cold. For the first time, she didn't feel weak. She felt wronged, betrayed. And in that realization, something began to change. The woman who had spent decades sacrificing herself for her family began to see the truth. She had been forgotten not by accident but by choice. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being their victim. The candle's flame flickered higher, reflecting in her eyes like a spark of awakening. The house might have been empty, but Eleanor's heart was not. It was filling with something new, something powerful. By the time she went to bed that night, the silence no longer scared her. It fueled her. Because in the quiet of that empty house, Eleanor Gray took her first step toward the next morning. The world outside Eleanor's window looked the same. Soft sunlight on her unkempt garden, the same chirping of birds, the same emptiness pressing in. But inside her heart, something had shifted. The silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like proof of her invisibility. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with her cup of coffee, staring at her phone. It had been weeks since she had heard from either of her children. Months, perhaps. She had stopped counting because the numbers only deepened the pain. The phone remained a constant presence, like a reminder of a world that had moved on without her. She scrolled through old messages. Her daughter, Clara, had texted 6 months ago, "Mom, can you send me $300 for Lily's school trip? I'll pay you back soon." Eleanor had sent it immediately. There had been no thank you, no update, no call, just silence. Michael's last message was even older. It wasn't even to ask how she was. It was about a bill. "Mom, could you cover the last payment on the car? I'll sort it out later." He never did. Now, as she looked at those words on her screen, her heart hardened. All her life she had believed that being a good mother meant saying yes. Yes to sacrifices, yes to late nights, yes to every demand. But all her yeses had turned her into a shadow. Her children didn't see her as a mother anymore, just as a wallet, a helper, an old woman whose feelings didn't matter. Her thoughts wandered back to her younger days. She remembered working double shifts at the diner while Harold was recovering from surgery. She remembered sewing Clara's prom dress by hand when they couldn't afford a store-bought one. She remembered every night she'd stayed awake waiting for Michael to come home safely. Her life had been a constant offering of love. But love, she realized bitterly, meant nothing when it wasn't returned. The memories began to suffocate her. She stood up abruptly and went to her bookshelf, pulling out an old family photo album, the one that wasn't damaged. She flipped through the pictures, birthdays, holidays, graduations. The faces smiled back at her, but she no longer recognized the people in them. Those moments were gone. Those smiles were lies. She picked up the phone again and called Clara. The dial tone rang and rang before going to voicemail. Eleanor's voice trembled as she began to speak. "Hi. Sweetheart, I just wanted to check in. It's been a while since I heard from you. I miss you." But halfway through, her throat tightened. She hung up without finishing the message. For the rest of the day, she waited. She checked her phone every few minutes, hoping to see a reply. Evening came, but the screen stayed dark. It wasn't until late at night that she finally received a text from Clara. "Sorry, Mom. Been super busy. Hope you're okay. No, I miss you." No warmth, just words to quiet her, nothing more. Eleanor stared at the message until the letters blurred. Busy. That was always the excuse. Busy with work, busy with family, busy with life. Too busy for the woman who gave them everything. She put the phone down and whispered to herself, "They forgot me." The words hurt as they left her mouth, but they were true. She had become an afterthought in the very lives she had built. She walked to her bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept old letters. There were dozens, birthday cards, Mother's Day notes from when Clara and Michael were little. She unfolded one, written in a child's uneven handwriting. "I love you. Mommy, you are my hero." Tears filled her eyes, dripping onto the paper. Where had that love gone? When did it fade? As she sat there surrounded by memories, something inside her began to turn cold. For years she had blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't affectionate enough. Maybe she didn't visit them often. Maybe she said the wrong things. But now she began to see it differently. Maybe the problem wasn't her at all. Maybe her kindness had been mistaken for weakness. The next morning she decided to test a theory. She sent both her children a message. "Hi, dears. I might need some help with bills this month. Things are a little tight." She waited. Hours passed. By noon, both her children had replied, almost instantly. "Clara, Mom, I wish I could help, but we're short right now. Michael, that's tough. Maybe sell something? You have lots of stuff in that house." Eleanor stared at the messages, her stomach turning. The irony was almost cruel. When they needed help, she had always given, but when she asked, they offered excuses. She turned off her phone. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence carried a new sound, the echo of awakening. For the first time in her life, Eleanor began to feel something other than heartbreak. It was anger, yes, but it was also power, the kind that comes when a person finally stops begging for love that isn't there. She went to the mirror and studied her reflection. The woman who looked back wasn't fragile anymore. Her eyes, once soft with hope, were now sharp with understanding. She touched the wrinkles on her face and smiled faintly. "You've done enough," she told her reflection. "It's time they remember who you are." That night she didn't cry. She wrote in her notebook instead, page after page of truth, about the years she gave, the nights she waited, the pain she swallowed. It wasn't revenge yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of something. The first spark in a heart that had been cold too long. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt alive. Forgotten, yes, but no longer powerless. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice began to whisper, "They took everything from you. Now it's your turn to take something back." The morning sun rose quietly over the town, painting the sky in soft shades of gold. But inside Eleanor Gray's home, peace was a stranger. The night before had been restless. She had dreamt of voices, laughter, and faces she no longer recognized. Her children's laughter haunted her like ghosts that would not leave. When she opened her eyes, she felt the same emptiness, but something inside had changed. It was no longer the emptiness of loss. It was the silence before a storm. Eleanor sat at the breakfast table, staring at the cup of tea in her hands. The bitterness of the drink matched the taste in her heart. She had spent her entire life trying to make her children's world perfect, and in return, they had erased her from theirs. But now she realized something powerful. She didn't have to be their victim anymore. She still had her mind, her name, and her truth. And truth, she thought, can hurt more than any weapon. Later that afternoon, she began cleaning again. But this time, her movements were not those of a tired old woman. They were deliberate, precise. She opened old drawers, emptied closets, and gathered papers that told the story of her life. Letters, receipts, old photographs, her journal. Each piece of paper held a memory, and each memory held a wound. As she read through old letters from Harold, she smiled sadly. He had always told her that she was stronger than she believed. "Don't let the world forget you, Ellie," he had written once. "You're worth remembering." Those words struck something deep inside her. Maybe Harold had known even then that one day she would need to remember who she was. By evening, she had filled a box with her life's fragments. She sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and whispered to herself, "They took my love for granted. Now they'll remember it differently." That night, she began to write. The first sentence came slowly. "My name is Eleanor Gray, and I am a mother they chose to forget." The words flowed like a flood that had been waiting years to break free. Page after page, she poured out everything. The nights of loneliness, the sacrifices, the pain of being used and dismissed. She didn't hold back. She wrote about Clara's cold indifference, Michael's selfishness, the countless times she'd been manipulated with false love. But she didn't write with anger. She wrote with clarity. Every sentence was sharp, every memory detailed. It wasn't revenge she sought in blood or tears. It was justice through truth. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor stopped calling or messaging her children. She stopped waiting for them. She didn't send money anymore. For the first time in years, her phone stayed silent, and she didn't mind. She sold her old house quietly without telling anyone. The papers were signed, the deal was done, and she watched movers carry out the furniture she once polished with care. The walls echoed with memories as she walked through the empty rooms one last time. She touched the doorframe of Michael's room, the window of Clara's, and whispered, "You took the love, but I'll take the story." Her new home was a small cottage by the sea, peaceful, hidden, free, the salty wind, the rhythmic waves, the sound of seagulls. It was the kind of quiet she had never known before. There, surrounded by nature, Eleanor found strength. She bought a second-hand desk, placed it by the window overlooking the ocean, and made it her writing corner. Each morning she wrote, each night she edited. Her story grew thicker, darker, more honest. She titled it, "The Woman They Abandoned." It wasn't just a memoir, it was a confession. Sometimes, when the memories became too heavy, she would walk along the beach, barefoot in the sand, talking to Harold in her heart. "You were right," she would whisper. "I am stronger than I thought." The townspeople, curious about the quiet woman who had moved in alone, would sometimes stop to chat. Eleanor was polite but private. They didn't know that behind her calm smile lived a storm of truth ready to be unleashed. One evening, as she reviewed her chapters, she realized that her story wasn't only about her pain. It was about every mother who had been forgotten, every woman who had been taken for granted. She decided she would share it with the world. She reached out to a local publisher anonymously, sending them a few pages. Within a week, she received a reply. The editor's message was filled with admiration. "Your words are raw, powerful, and real. I've never read anything that captures heartbreak like this. We'd be honored to publish it." Eleanor felt her heart race. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. Someone saw her, not as a mother or a forgotten widow, but as a voice. As the manuscript neared completion, she sat by the window one night, looking at the moon reflecting over the waves. "They will read this," she said softly, "and they will finally know what they did." But a part of her deep inside didn't just want them to hurt. She wanted them to understand. She wanted her children to feel the same emptiness they had left her in, not out of cruelty, but because only through that pain could they see her again. The next morning, she mailed the final manuscript. Watching the postal worker drive away, she felt something lift from her chest, a burden she had carried for decades. As the sea wind brushed her gray hair, she whispered, "This isn't revenge. This is remembrance." And in that moment, the seeds of revenge had fully taken root, not in hatred, but in truth. Eleanor Gray, the forgotten mother, was no longer silent. She was becoming a storm, and soon the world would hear her roar. The waves crashed against the shore as Eleanor Gray sat on the porch of her seaside cottage, watching the horizon turn crimson with dawn. It had been months since she mailed her manuscript, and life had taken on a strange, peaceful rhythm. She had expected silence, maybe a polite rejection, but the world had other plans. It began quietly. A single review appeared online, written by a well-known book critic. A heartbreaking, brutally honest story of motherhood, betrayal, and rediscovery, the critic wrote. The review went viral overnight. Readers began searching for the author of The Woman They Abandoned, trying to uncover the mystery behind the name E.G. Hart, the pseudonym Eleanor had used. Within weeks, her book was everywhere, in bookstores, on talk shows, across social media. People quoted her words, cried over her chapters, and shared their own stories of neglect, love, and forgiveness. Women around the world saw themselves in her pain. Eleanor watched it all unfold with quiet disbelief. She had written her truth, not for fame, but for release. Yet now, her words had become a voice for thousands of forgotten mothers. Her pain had turned into power. Then, one morning, her phone rang. A number she hadn't seen in months. Clara. Eleanor hesitated before answering. "Hello," her daughter's voice came through, trembling and breathless. "Mom, is it true? Did you write that book?" Eleanor paused. She could almost hear the chaos in the background. Reporters calling, friends gossiping, Clara's perfect suburban life cracking open. "Yes," she said finally. Her voice was calm, steady. Every word. There was a silence, thick and heavy. Then Clara whispered, "How could you?" "Everyone knows it's about us. About me and Michael. You've ruined everything." Eleanor let the words sink in. For years, she had cried for their approval, begged for their attention. But now, she felt nothing but clarity. "No, Clara," she replied softly. "You ruined everything when you forgot I was your mother. Before Clara could respond, Eleanor ended the call. Later that day, another call came. Michael, this time his voice was cold, angry. "Mom, what the hell did you do? My business is losing clients because of that damn book." Eleanor almost smiled. "You mean because of the truth?" "This isn't fair," he shouted. "You made us look like monsters?" Eleanor's eyes hardened. "I didn't make you look like anything, Michael. You did that all on your own." And she hung up again. For the first time in her life, she didn't tremble after ending a call with her children. She didn't cry. Instead, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat on her porch, feeling lighter than she had in years. But the reckoning wasn't over. Within days, both of her children appeared at her cottage unannounced. Their expensive car pulled up in the dirt driveway, a symbol of the lives they had built without her. Eleanor stood by the door as they got out, Clara in designer clothes, her expression tight with anger, Michael looking tired, guilt shadowing his face. "Mom, we need to talk," Clara began sharply. "You have to take it down. The book, the interviews, everything. You're destroying our lives." Eleanor met her eyes calmly. "My life was destroyed long before this book, Clara. You just never noticed." Michael stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Mom, please. People are calling us heartless. We're being humiliated. Don't you care what happens to us?" Eleanor's eyes softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. "Do you care what happened to me, Michael? When you forgot my birthday? When you stopped calling? When you needed money but never asked how I was? Did you care then?" Neither of them spoke. The silence that followed was more painful than shouting could ever be. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice trembling but strong. "You made me a stranger in your lives. You shut the door on me one silence at a time. I wrote what I lived. If it hurts you, it's because you finally felt what I felt." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You could have talked to us." Eleanor gave a faint smile. "I tried. You never listened. For a long time, no one spoke. The sea roared in the background, the wind tangling Eleanor's gray hair. Finally, she said, "You both came here today not because you care about me, but because you care about how you look. You've built your lives on appearances. I built mine on love. The difference is, mine was real." Clara turned away, crying silently. Michael stared at his mother, guilt flickering in his eyes. "We didn't mean to forget you, Mom. We just got caught up." Eleanor looked at him gently but firmly. "You don't forget your mother, Michael. You choose not to see her. And now the world sees you the way I always did, not out of hate but out of truth." They stood there, three people bound by blood but separated by choices. Clara's anger dissolved into shame, Michael's arrogance into silence. Eleanor finally sighed and said, "You should go. The tide's coming in." As they turned to leave, Clara hesitated. "Will you ever forgive us?" Eleanor looked toward the sea. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, Clara. It's something you earn. And I've waited long enough." When their car disappeared down the road, Eleanor walked to the edge of the shore. The waves touched her feet, cold and comforting. She whispered to the wind, "You told me to never let them forget me. Harold, I think they finally remember." That night she sat by her window, the glow of the moon on her manuscript copy. The book had cost her everything, her silence, her sorrow, her years of pretending. But in return, it had given her back her dignity, her strength. And her voice, Eleanor Gray, the woman they abandoned, had finally made the world and her children listen. The reckoning was complete. The days that followed the confrontation at the seaside cottage were quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Eleanor Gray spent her mornings watching the sea, her afternoons tending to the small garden she had planted, and her evenings writing letters she would never send. The storm had passed, both outside and within her. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up with the ache of longing. The house no longer felt haunted by memories. Instead, it breathed with peace, fragile but real. The book had changed everything. It had stripped away illusions, exposing the truth of her family's love, or the lack of it. People still wrote to her through the publisher, letters from mothers, wives, and daughters who saw themselves in her story. They thanked her for giving voice to their pain. Some even came to the seaside town hoping to meet the mysterious woman who had made the world cry. But Eleanor rarely answered the door. She wasn't looking for admiration. She had already found what she needed, herself. One crisp morning, while the wind carried the scent of salt and pine through her window, the doorbell rang. She hesitated, then opened it. Standing there, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, was Clara. Her daughter looked older than she remembered. Her hair tied back carelessly, her face pale and weary. "Hi, Mom," Clara said softly. Eleanor stepped aside. "Come in." The two women sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor had once spent nights writing the story that tore them apart. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, Clara spoke. "I read the book again. All of it. Not as your daughter this time, but as a stranger." The Eleanor looked at her, her eyes gentle but wary. And what did the stranger see? Clara's voice broke. "A woman I never really knew. A mother who loved too much, who gave too much. I thought you were just strong, that nothing could break you. I never realized you were breaking every day." A tear slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't change what I did, but I see it now. I see you." Eleanor's heart trembled. She wanted to believe her, wanted to reach out and hug her, but years of silence had built walls too thick to tear down in one moment. "Still," she said softly, "thank you, Clara. Seeing is the first step." They talked for hours, about the past, about the pain, about the little things they had both missed. When Clara left that evening, she didn't promise to visit more often or to make everything right, but she did look back at her mother and say, "You're not a stranger anymore." That night, Eleanor sat by the window and whispered into the quiet, "Maybe this is what redemption looks like. Not noise, not apologies, but understanding." Days later, another knock came at her door. This time, it was Michael. He looked uncomfortable, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Hey, Mom," he muttered. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I was wondering when you'd come." He sat down across from her, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I was angry at first. But then I read some of the letters people wrote about your book. They called you brave. I think they're right." Eleanor didn't speak, letting him find his words. Michael sighed. "I treated you like a backup plan. Every time I needed something, I came running. But when you needed me, I wasn't there. I didn't even notice you were alone. I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air like a fragile truce. Eleanor studied her son, the boy she had once rocked to sleep, the man who had forgotten her, and she felt both sadness and peace. "I forgave you long before you came," she said quietly. "Not for you. For me?" Michael's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," Eleanor replied, "but forgiveness isn't about deserving, it's about letting go." He nodded, wiping his face. "Can we start over?" Eleanor smiled, though her eyes shimmered with emotion. "We can start small. That's how healing begins." They didn't talk about the book again. They didn't need to. The story had already said everything. Weeks passed, and the visits from her children became more regular. Not perfect, not constant, but genuine. Sometimes they came with groceries, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing but time. Each visit stitched a small part of her heart back together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sea glowed like molten gold, Eleanor sat outside watching the tide roll in. The breeze lifted her gray hair, and the sound of the waves lulled her into deep reflection. She thought of Harold, of their life together, of the love that had built and broken her. She thought of the house she'd left behind, the children she'd raised, the woman she had become. Her life had been filled with pain, but it had also been filled with purpose. For so long she had seen herself as the victim, the forgotten mother, the erased woman. But now she saw something else. She had survived abandonment, grief, and betrayal, and turned them into a story that healed not just her, but others too. She whispered into the wind. I found myself in losing them. The horizon burned with color as if the sky itself was listening. Eleanor closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Peace wasn't loud, she realized. It didn't come with apologies or grand gestures. It came quietly, in understanding, in forgiveness, in truth. When she finally rose to go inside, she glanced at her writing desk. Her manuscript, the one that had once been a weapon, now rested on the shelf framed in soft lamplight. It wasn't just a book anymore, it was her legacy. Eleanor smiled. The stranger she had become was gone. The mother remained wiser, stronger, and free. And as the waves whispered against the shore, she felt Harold beside her, his voice in her heart saying, "You did it, Ellie. You found your way home."